Silence in court, please. I didn't do anything. You put the cap on your head, so maybe God will stay on and rest. God, אתה רוצה להישאר? בוא תישאר. Swear by God, my testimony in this trial will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Josef Lautmann. Doctor, yes. Josef Lautmann, doctor, yes.
Judge Landau, if you wish to, you may remain seated while testifying. Judge Landau, please reply to Mr. Bach's questions. Mr. Bach, Dr. Melkman, were you born in Holland?
Yes.
When did you immigrate to this country?
In May 1957.
Mr. Bach, in addition to having personally experienced what happened to the Dutch Jewry during the war, you also did research on this problem?
Yes, particularly as I was director of Yad Vashem, but also before as an editor of a Jewish weekly. There were various cases which I had to
Mr. Bach, when were you the director of Yad Vashem?
From 1957 up to 1916.
Belgium. They
had been extended over the whole of the Jewish community.
Mr. Bach, yes. Did you know Mr. Edelstein?
Yes, indeed.
Mr. Bach, whence did he come, and what in fact was his duty in connection with the Jewish committee?
Edelstein came also in March from Prague, and his task consisted in instructing the Jews how to organize Judenrat and how to cooperate with the Germans. We had a meeting.
Mr. Bach, could you explain this a little
He
more?
was to instruct the Jews how to establish and maintain contacts with the Germans, because the Jews of Holland apparently didn't know how these how these connections should have been established. I participated with him at a meeting held at the house of the President of the Federation of Jews of Holland. I must say that he made an impression of a very devoted worker and an outspoken one. He depicted to us the situation in Czechoslovakia in very dark colors. He spoke about forced labor, and he told us that the Germans were scheming to murder us. He didn't know, of course, how, but he had the impression that this was in store for us. And he told us that what he had to do was to hold our own and keep a stiff upper lip. Of course, the Dutch didn't quite know the situation, didn't realize the gravity. They saw the strikes in support of the Jews, and they believed that the Dutch population would not let the Germans implement their hideous plans. He told us that the most terrible perils were attendant upon us, but his words of the writing of the wall was not seriously taken by the Jews at that time.
Mr. Bach, now Dr. Melkman, how about the wearing of the yellow star? When was that introduced? Judge Landau, I should like to understand about Edelstein. You said he appeared to be sincere.
Yes.
I assume he was sincere. Or would you like to say anything else about this? Because I don't think you can leave it as it is, saying he appeared sincere.
I'm saying this because research was published on Theresienstadt, and what was said here runs counter to the impression that might have been created later on, because I say that he made a very good impression on me, and I said that I believed he was a very sincere man.
Judge Landau, in any event, you personally found no reason to change your opinion about Edelstein.
On the contrary, the direct contact was very favorable. What he told us then was extremely outspoken and sincere. When I think about it in the retrospect, I believe that we didn't really understand what he said, and he was most outspoken and sincere.
Judge Halevi, by whom was Edelstein sent to Holland?
He was sent to Holland by the German authorities. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to come.
Mr. Bach, Dr. Melkman, when was the order given for the wearing of the yellow Star of David?
The ordinance with regard to the Yellow Star was given on the 7th of April 1942. Many Jews wore the Yellow Star with pride because they said that we were not ashamed of being Jews. There were many Gentiles who, in the first days, as a sign of protest, greeted us demonstratively when we were wearing the Yellow Star, and also spread the samples of the Yellow Star, writing that Jews and non-Jews alike are united in the struggle against the authorities.
Mr. Bach, you said it applied to all of them? The witness, yes, every child from the age of 6 up had to wear the Yellow Star. Mr. Bach, now from June 1941.
And those cars blared the report that the Jews were to present themselves.
Dr. Melkman, when were you detained? Mr. Bach, how did you hold out so long until 1943?
The reason why I held out was that I was a teacher at a Jewish secondary school, and this was this gave a possibility to survive. Though I got instructions to leave, yet I was somehow rather permitted to stay.
Dr. Melkman, I understand you and your child too managed to return. Now, would you describe to the court the circumstances of your arrest?
This was a roundup in June 1943, directed against a residential quarter. We had moved then. We were compelled to move in accordance with the orders of the authorities, and then they rounded up the district into which we had moved, and then the police came, accompanied by people wearing civilian clothes. They would search all flats whether the Jews were still there, and those they found were concentrated in one place and from there brought to the adjacent camp. And 15,000 people were affected by the roundup.
Mr. Bach, you and your wife were there at Westerbork.
Myself and my wife, we managed to hide our boy.
Who hid them?
There was a Gentile woman who was ready to keep the boy. First of all, we were reluctant to do so, but this was close to the Day of Atonement of 1942, when the cousin of my wife was arrested. He was a rabbi, and his family was also arrested. This influenced us, and therefore we decided at least to save the boy. And on the Day of Atonement, Yom HaKippur of that day, we handed the boy to the colleague of mine from the school, and she kept the boy until the end of the war. He was 14 months then.
Mr. Bach, now Dr. Melkman. what caused the situation that, is in view of the fact that the Germans knew of the list of the 3 people, you yourself and your wife and the child, and while the child was hiding at the time, how was this not noticed by the Germans?
This was not such an important problem because in Westenberg it was still possible to arrange things. When we were brought at night on the 20th of June in a carriage usually used for horses transports to Westenberg, a young girl was sitting in front of us. She was about 19 years old and she was carrying a young boy.
What about the husband of this woman?
The husband had already been arrested for some sort of offense and he had already been sent to a concentration camp. He had already been killed there, and she was the sole survivor with the child, and in the middle of the night we entered into conversation with her. She told us the story of her life, and the boy was actually lying close to us, and he was exactly in the same age as our boy. There was a difference of 3 days between the two, and we asked her whether she could stay in Westenbroek, whether she had papers authorizing her to stay there. She said that she had no papers of that kind, and we proposed to her that we should take the child because we thought that the papers we had would be valid and that the list for the immigration into Israel would be valid, and the child would be registered in our name, and she would stay as long as she can and later on might join the child. When we arrived in Westenberg, what happened to the woman? After 9 days, though she was alone, she was sent there, because to Westenberg usually the family was more in a more dangerous situation than individual people. Therefore, it was sometimes
Mr. Bach, we'll get to this point. Just complete the story.
She was sent to Sobibor later on, and she never came back, but the child stayed with us.
Mr. Bach, where is this boy now?
This child now is here in Israel and is studying in an institute for the instructors of Tnuat Shomer Tza'ir to be sent abroad.
Mr. Bach, yes, Dr. Melkman. Words.
Now tell us, please, in what way the deportations were organized, deportation to the east? How was it established? How did you know about it? How were people mobilized? How would a man know that he was to be taken
Witness
and deported?
Melkman, the commander, would inform the Jewish administration in Westerbork that on the next day, it was always the Tuesday of the week, that a certain number of predetermined number of people, 1, 2, or 3,000 people would have to be deported, and the Jewish administration had to submit a list of people, a list of names who would be deported. A little over the quota, because naturally there was the possibility that there would be people who would die en route, and Auschwitz always had to receive the full complement, the full quota. So if the quota was 1,000, they would send 1,020. These lists, well, they began handling these lists on Friday or Saturday. Sometimes there were people included in the list, or these people might have had papers which would have presumably protected them against deportation, and if they did not have enough human material, they lifted this immunity. This became known on Saturday, and then as the more Tuesday was approaching, the closer it came, the more tension rose. And on Tuesday night, 3 a.m. past midnight.
Always in the morning.
I'm sorry, in the night between Monday and Tuesday, they would seal off the barracks where we lived. All the barracks were sealed hermetically. We were not permitted to go in or go out. And then the barrack elder would call out the name of the doomed people. It was an alphabetical list. Sometime there was another additional alphabetical list, and I must say that of all the horrible things I have witnessed later, horrible tortures and all that, the strongest impression which I have retained, and this is the same with others, was that night between Monday and Tuesday, 3 a.m. in the middle of the night, when there was deadly silence and darkness, and the names would be read out, as though a death sentence would be read out every night to the doomed people. Sometimes you yourself might be included, and if not you yourself, then your relatives, friends, acquaintances. Every week this recurred, a certain number of death sentences in that hour, and that created a devastating impression on all of us. We still retain a sensitivity for Tuesday to this very day. We still remember this as the day of the death sentence to Dutch Jews.
Did you know that you are earmarked for death?
Melkman, we did not know it was death, certain death, but I can say that I saw in the beginning of 1943, I saw an official list made for the Judenrat, for the Jewish Elders Council, and there it said that apparently in Poland there are now fewer Jews than before. We had known that many Jews were sent to Poland, but we did not know what was their fate. Possibly, even if we did know it, we could not believe that it actually happened. I myself heard about it with any degree of certainty later when I was in Bergen-Belsen, and the first transports arrived there of people who had been in women's camps at Auschwitz. I spoke to the returnees, and I heard about the gas chambers.
Dr. Melkman, those people who were on the list on Tuesday morning, when would they leave?
Witness, on the next morning, they all had to go out to the main highway near the railroad tracks. There was a train. They had to pile into the train, and usually the train, yes, this was inside camp. The train went through the camp, the tracks were passing right through the camp, and the train came, the people entered, the wagons were sealed off. This was done by the German policemen. A special group was always assigned for this, a special task unit of the German police, and the people were put into the trains. The train would usually leave at 11 a.m.
What kind of train was that, generally? Were they goods trains
Witness,
or other trains?
a freight train. At first I heard there were passenger trains, but as long as I witnessed these matters during these 8 months, these were always freight trains.
Do you know how many people were in one carriage?
It differed from case to case. We knew the quota, 2,000, 3,000 during the big deportations, sometimes only 1,000. But the exact number we learned only after the war. But this is approximately how it was.
And your family, what happened to your family, to your relative who stayed in Westenberg?
Witness Melkman. Almost all members of my family were at Westerbork. My brother died at Westerbork 5 days after we got there. He had heart disease. My mother was deported on the 13th of July, and as we learned later, she was sent to Sobibor, and from Sobibor hardly anyone ever returned. The 33,000 Jews who were sent there, out of them only 13 returned. So the chances of survival were 1/2 a person per 1,000. And my sister was sent on the 25th of January to Auschwitz. Judge Landau, 44 you mean? 1944? Witness, yes, 1944. She was captured, she was in hiding, and because she was in hiding, there was a punitive measure against her. She was a physician, but nevertheless we could not manage to find room for her in the hospital, because these punitive cases were not permitted to work in the hospital, and thus she was sent. She must have died in Auschwitz. My brother-in-law was also sent in August already, 43, August 43. He died in Mauthausen in February 1945. In addition, all my uncles and aunts, their children, boys and girls, except for the children who were hidden with non-Jews, and this included 3 children of my sister. They are all in this country now.
Dr. Melkman, you recalled that there were people who were in hiding and who were later on found.
Witness, yes.
Could you tell us something about their position? Would you tell us what was their morale? How did they react?
Witness, the conditions in the hiding places are known to the world a little bit through Anne Frank's diary. But perhaps in order to give a general impression what it means to be in such hiding, I shall relate the story of one child, something which I saw. My wife and myself, we worked at the children's home in the Westerbork camp. And children would always arrive there, children who were captured by the Germans, children who had no parents, or where the parents were in hiding or had been deported. In fact, they were all orphans, and we helped them, we treated them only for very brief periods. They had no protection and were immediately deported usually. And I remember one case of a boy. His name was Van Dam. I do not remember his first name. Van Dam was his name. I do not recall his first name. He was 10 years old. He was locked up for 1 whole year in a narrow room. He was not permitted to raise his voice, not to raise his voice, but not even to speak in a normal voice. He was not permitted to walk about as a boy does, lest the neighbors hear him. When he finally came to Westerbork, he came to this children's home. He also began, he still spoke in a whisper, and when he was told this was no longer necessary, when he understood this, he started running around the courtyard very fast. He ran all the time. He could not stop, and he shouted at the top of his voice, because all the previous year he had not been permitted to walk or speak above a whisper. So that this life in hiding, especially for the children who never understood what was happening, this was horrible. And often we would ask ourselves, when we were in the camp and we saw that the children in the camp, they could live, somehow they could live as children. Perhaps this was even better than hiding. But of course later we learned what fate was awaiting those who were sent to Poland, and what was the fate that befell the people in Holland who were hiding. We understood that comparatively the fate of those in hiding was better, because many of them were saved by Jews who were friendly, by non-Jews who were friendly to the Jews. But it is very difficult to describe the psychological suffering inflicted on a boy who has to live for such a long period, 2 years perhaps, even longer, under such conditions.
Dr. Melkman, what happened to this child you've been telling us about?
Melkman, he was sent to Auschwitz after 3 days. That at night there were still a few drops of water. And at first we would receive 4 centimeters of bread. This is how it was measured. At the end, even this we did not obtain. There was no coal. I knew that very well. I was in a company which carted this coal. We had no coal nor firewood. From time to time we would receive a little bit of water, and that was called a soup. And at the end there were scores of thousands of people. The dead were lying in the street. We could not walk around without stepping into human excrement. It was a living nightmare. In our camp too, there were several camps. There was the big camp of Bergen-Belsen. It was split up into several camps. The Sternlager, the star camp, for people who were still wearing the star, the Jews. Then there was the concentration camp, and other categories of people who were separately held. And in this big camp, where they had almost no food, I was, as I said, in a company which carted coal, and we saw all kitchens. And in all these other camps too, these separate camps, it was the same situation. We had permission to visit all these camps, and so I arrived in the concentration camp for women who had come back from Auschwitz, beginning in November 1944 it was, I believe. And there I saw horrible things. Women who saw this barrel where there was some remnants of food, and they just grabbed what was at the bottom of this barrel, and then a German soldier, a woman soldier, came and she beat them and scattered them. And there were even cases of cannibalism which I saw. And this survey, which was later written by the Jewish elder Weiss, who is now in Jerusalem, he had the duty of noting all the details, keeping a log of all what was happening in the camp, and he recalls 14 incidents of cannibalism in the camp.
Dr. Melkman, could you tell us just one more thing, please?
Count all that happened during those 3 years of the German rule in Holland.
In Belgium.
I now intend, Your Honors, to bring evidence through documents to corroborate what we heard from Mr. Melkman this morning, and to prove the direct contact between the accused and every stage of this extermination of Dutch Jewry. The first document is our number 719, which was shown to the accused and numbered T37 brackets 194. The document is in regard to a letter and the subject is the concentration of Jewish property and its management. One of the assistants of the accused, Dr. Ayakovich, is mentioned in this letter. And it says in the letter that it seems that he will not be eager to set up an organization similar to that set up in Prague. This will not be done, but we are informed that Dr. Yarakovich will be willing to be a member of the company set up to run the matters of Jewish property. Rayakovich is one of the men sent by the accused at this stage to Holland. The office of the expert representing the accused in Holland regarding Jewish affairs. This is T435. The following document, our number 1355. Here, a man by the name of Stühle Stühler, it seems, wrote to the General Commissar for Internal Affairs near Inquart's office. Zeiss Inquart was the Reichskommissar for the Netherlands. This is T526. And here the matter of intermarriages with Jews. And there is one quotation very typical. He is very eager to make the rules more severe and to compare the situation of half-Jews to those of Jews. He is the man Reichshauer, the counselor in München. He is the man to advise on Jewish affairs mentioned by the accused in his statement, and he is the man who brought forward this proposition that half-Jews be considered as Jews for extermination reasons. There was an objection on part of the German army and even from Hitler himself, because the result would be that also quarter Jews would have to be removed from the army ranks. And Keitel believed that thousands of German Jews would be within this category and they would be removed from the army. Therefore, the objection. In close cooperation with Reichshauer, it says, Sturmbannführer Eichmann works in the security office. He has set up the centers for emigration in Vienna and Prague and conducted the transports and deportations of Jews. Eichmann as well is for the new arrangement, although he expresses himself a little mildly and says only if this form or approach is binding. By the way, this is not the only document the prosecution intends to submit, that in certain points the accused was even more extreme in his approach than the Führer himself. Your Honors, I understand the court will sit until 5:30. Then I would now touch upon the story of Denmark. And I wish to call upon the witness David Melchior. David Melchior. Okay.
Probably speak English.
The Bible, you speak Hebrew? Yes. I swear by God that my testimony in this case will be the truth, all the truth, and nothing but the truth. Your name?
Werner David Melchior.
Melchior. Please carry on. Will you please answer Mr. Bach's questions? Mr. Melchior, since when are you in the country?
I arrived in January 1946.
You spent your childhood in Copenhagen, Denmark.
Yes, I did.
Also, your parents lived there as well?
Yes, also. I also lived in Germany. We were in Germany for a number of years because my father was a rabbi in Bochum for a certain period of time.
Where?
Bochum.
Your father, in fact, since 47, is a chief rabbi in Denmark?
Yes.
And what did your father do in 43?
In 1943, my father was rabbi, but the chief rabbi was his predecessor, Dr.
What was the previous chief rabbi?
Dr. Friediger. And my rabbi had important tasks in the community. After the arrest of Dr. Friediger, together with his son, in August 1943, my father became acting chief rabbi.
When the Germans entered Denmark on the 9th of April 40, were you in Denmark and your family?
Yes, together with the family.
How many Jews were there in Denmark at the time?
There were about 7,900 Jews, out of whom there were about 1,400 refugees from Central Europe, among whom there were about 550 members of the Hachshara and other youth movements.
What were the how were the Jews treated by the non-Jews in Denmark?
We were treated on equal footing in every respect with the remainder of the population in all the realms of life.
Now, the first stage after the entry of the Germans was there at the time. Did you feel any influence as a result of the entry of the Germans in regard to the Jewish population?
Not particularly with regard to the Jews. Of course, at least some part, at least, of the Jewish circles were rather excited and nervous, particularly the refugees felt more uneasy than the families which had arrived in Denmark many years before. And so far as the old families were concerned, they were calm and not at all nervous.
The Germans...
The incidents and protests reflected the attitude of the population favorable to the Jews.
Mr. Melchior, when was the action against Jews done?
The first action started
Copenhagen?
on one Saturday, 1944.
Did the Germans succeed to keep their plans secret?
On a Tuesday, on the 28th of September, news was received whose source was to be traced to the German commander on navigation
Where was
questions.
this received?
He gave the news to the leaders of the Social Democratic Party.
He was Prime Minister the year earlier. And what was this information? The report was very exact and founded that the roundup would take place on Friday night and Saturday night of the same week. We, after the previous rumors, we had 3 days to run for ourselves, and there were stages to be taken, and the roundup took actually 2 or 3 weeks, and people in most cases escaped or succeeded in finding a place of hiding. The presiding judge, who was the man in charge? A German appointed by the Germans, Duckwitz, and after the war he was the first German ambassador to Denmark and is at the moment also in the Foreign Office. What did you do, asked the prosecution, when you got this information? Answer, the Social Democratic leaders themselves and others got in touch with Jews. This was on a Tuesday afternoon. And at the time, there were Jews who refused to believe. But it was explained to them that the Danish people who received this information are reliable, and the information came from reliable sources. Even those who could not digest this information, that such a thing would happen to us, were obliged at least to take the measures necessary to save themselves. And it was a Wednesday, the following day was a Wednesday, the day before New Year, and the formal notice which came on Wednesday morning in synagogue that the prayer would not be held, the Rosh Hashanah prayer, and Jews are advised not to be in their homes the next 2 days and to expect great happenings.
Mr. Bach, Mr. Melchior, not only you probably heard these rumors, but the non-Jews as well must have heard it in Copenhagen. Did you personally encounter any special attitude towards the Jews in connection with these rumors and the impending danger?
Most definitely. The rumors spread quickly. It is difficult to describe how quick the rumors spread, considering there were no means of communication, no technical means of communication. And, for instance, on the following day, my last day in Copenhagen, I went to the university to return some books and to give my address for the sending on of my mail. There at the university, two students came up to me, and I was greeting them when I entered, but we were not in the same circle of studies. They came up to me on their own initiative and told me in the very identical words, "See, we know who you are. We hear all kinds of rumors. We do not know how much truth there is in those rumors. But in case there is anything we can do for you, or anything we can do in general, please know that we are both ready, and you will find our address in the university catalog and get in touch with us if necessary." This happened twice within the 10 minutes I spent at the university that morning.
These were people whom you did not know?
We used to greet, but that was about all for 3 years which I spent at that university.
Mr. Bach, now this roundup was carried out, and what were the results?
The results were in proportion. That is, those hit, it was very serious, but in proportion, they were not serious. Some 472 Jews were caught.
Out of how many Jews in Denmark?
In the whole of Denmark, out of 7,700 approximately. These people who were rounded up were sent to Theresienstadt, and in Sweden, where we knew that the Danish interest taken in their fate never stopped, and in the year 44 there was a commission in the name of the king to find out what their situation was. We knew that the parcels sent to them were delivered by the government officers in Denmark, as well as far as I know, this was the only Jewish unit where there was no terror and no brutality, and their arrest, paradoxically, in the year 44, when the Danish police was liquidated and a large number of Danish policemen were sent to Buchenwald and died there, the Jews expelled from Denmark remained alive. Some 50 died in Theresienstadt, not as a result of brutality. A large number of those who were expelled were people of advanced age, amongst the others, because the homes for the aged, the evacuation did not succeed.
Mr. Bach, speaking about aged people, did you know a woman named Texiera?
Yes.
A woman then 102 years old. Judge Landau, was she Jewish?
Jewish
of
woman
Sephardi
of
origin?
Spanish origin. She was in the home for the aged, and I used to visit there once a week.
Mr. Bach, and this woman was not captured, she hid?
Yes. There were few cases where people succeeded to hide. There were two more Jews. One of them, Professor Warburg, an assistant to the king, and then the director of the State Bank.
No, Mr. Bach. Mr. Melchior, you personally, how did you manage to escape?
It was decided the night before the roundup that the family, my parents and 5 children, that we were to go to a priest, my father's acquaintance in the suburbs. And in the morning, on the Wednesday morning, I left to warn some of the people We knew that they were very quiet and confiding that nothing would happen. Nothing would happen. So, in the morning, the early morning, I went out to deliver those warnings. My brothers went to synagogue with my father and did the same on their way. I spoke to one of our acquaintances who said that on that day it was impossible to cross by boat to Sweden. This was a kind of experiment. It was not known yet. The development, the drastic development of this movement in the following weeks was not foreseen. We were discussing at home whether we 5 souls should leave all to one place. But on the other hand, we believed that this would be of great help to ourselves if we knew what was happening to the other and if we stayed together. I returned and we had to leave at 12:30 by rail.
Judge Landau, where did you go? Where did this clergyman live?
In one of the small towns around Copenhagen, some 80 kilometers. We packed only essential things, a toothbrush, tefillin, prayer shawls, in order not to raise suspicion. I came home, I spoke about this possibility, and at the time, because we could not be convinced that something really serious would happen in Copenhagen, we came to the conclusion that in case something does happen, it would be good that one of us would be able to cross into Sweden to organize some
Mr. Bach,
help.
and how did you get there?
I came to the railway station, and that night with a small boat where there was room only for 3 people. We rode for 2.5 hours. People were so unprepared that the fishermen were afraid that the Swedes would confiscate the boat and asked us to jump into the water 300 meters from the shore. The Swedes were not ready yet. They did not have where to take us but to the police station, and we had our wet clothes on all night.
Mr. Melchior, how did your parents manage to escape? Judge Landau, how did you contact these 2 fishermen?
One of our acquaintances, one of my acquaintances, who had a big shop, and he had a secretary engaged to one of the fishermen. This is the way how everything happened. Someone had an acquaintance who had another acquaintance, and some other very strange connections. And there were cases where we heard from one Jew about the hiding place of another. But since there were a general cooperation of all organizations and institutions of the state and public institutions, individuals of all strata of life and all the population, then it almost did not happen that anyone could not reach the necessary information or contact. When an incident recurs all the time, then it is not an accident anymore, because the priest, for instance, also belonged to an organization which tried to help the Jews. He knew about the hiding place of my parents, and then they were transferred somewhere more to the south. And then it was difficult, but the bishops themselves dealt.
Judge Landau, you said the bishops, I'm sorry?
Yes, the bishops themselves. And especially the Danish police sometimes closed off the shore where the boats were supposed to leave. They pretended to search munitions, but they only closed the approach, actually. Sometimes ambulances were carrying Jews up to the place on the shore where they were to embark those boats.
Mr. Bach, how many people were there?
There were 30. They were on the way 17 hours and arrived some 10 days after me to Sweden.
Mr. Bach, do you know anything about a planned and organized operation by the Danish underground to save Jews?
This was not sporadic, because it was all over, actually. The dimensions were such that the historian in Denmark, Dr. Hestrup, whose very important work is not in relation to the Jews, and then he speaks of the saving of the Jews of a double importance. One, the matter of the illegal routes to Sweden, and then for 3.5 years of the previous occupation, there was not a moment where the population, the non-Jewish, was all for help to the Jewish population in Denmark. There was, for the first time, also on the part of the students and professors, unity and no difference of opinion regarding the help to be given to the Jews.
Mr. Bach, were there cases when the Germans discovered the location of these vessels, these rescue vessels, where Jews were embarking?
There were various cases. There was a case, not where a boat was about to leave, but Jews who were in a hideout, and they were betrayed. There were cases when Germans arrived, but this was really the out of the ordinary case to prove the rule, the general rule. Of course, at the same time, these things were not known, and except for very rare cases.
Mr. Bach, even during the roundup, these people did not break into the doors, they did not open the doors.
No, they did not burst into the homes. And there was a case when neighbors told the Jewish family on the following day that the Jews did burst into the house.
Did you reach Sweden with property or property-less?
In fact, we arrived penniless. We all arrived with our personal belongings, and one brother was sent to Copenhagen to take the king's letter sent on the 1st of January 43, and expressing his joy that there was no damage done to the family and to the synagogue.
Mr. Bach, do you know the name of the commander of the security police and security service, the German, at that time?
At the time, there were two names, Tarke and Kannstein. And of course, at the time, Dr. Mildner was
Mildner, M-I-L-D-N-E-R.
Quite a famous name at the time.
Dr. Savatius, have you any questions? Defense, no, I have no questions. Judge Landau, thank you. Mr. Melchior, you have concluded your evidence. Judge Landau, we have 2 minutes left, but I think we can end here. Mr. Bach, yes, I would appreciate this. If we don't lose the consecutive development here, I shall present my documents tomorrow. Judge Landau, we shall stop here. The next session tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock a.m.